appearance day of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who we're so fortunate to have as the presiding lords of this temple. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna himself, and he's Krishna that's come here just for the sole mission of teaching all the living entities of how to approach Krishna. So I see everyone's head looking up, so I think the slide went up there. Yeah. The title of this class. And it is an interesting title. It's called Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the Free Speech Movement. And I don't, I'm imagining everyone's wondering why we're talking about free speech, which is generally considered a very political aspect. It's part of our constitution in this country. It's part of why people are on the street doing crazy protests that often lead to traffic jams that I'm sure some people get stuck in. But a few months ago, I was reflecting during the time of our presidential inauguration in this country. There's so many protests going on around the country. Most notably this women's protest, which was in every major city in the country, millions of people. Just to speak of many others. I was reflecting on how our philosophy was connected to this kind of free speech movement where people rise up and talk. And as I was thinking about it, I realized that our whole movement was started on the back of one gigantic protest, if you think about it. And it's really connected to this occasion because the protest was inspired by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And I'm assuming most people here know which protest I'm referring to. And that is the protest when the Chandkazi banned the chanting of the Maha Mantra in Mayapur. There was a large protest. So I'd like to take it back and give some context to this topic. In Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's time in India, India was completely under Muslim rule. Actually, Hindus or followers of the Vedic scriptures were extremely oppressed at that time. The emperor, Aurangzeb, I'm sure many of you have heard of, he had even instituted a tax at one point that just by being a Hindu or following the Vedic principles, you had to pay this tax. That actually led many people to convert to being Muslim, just so they didn't have to pay the tax. As they were poor, they had a hard time, so they couldn't follow the Vedic principles anymore. So when Mahaprabhu came, he came to revive these Vedic practices. And when he did that, he greatly encouraged the chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So when that started, there was many Muslims who were very upset at this. Understandably, they'd had many years of, just very quiet, being able to practice freely, doing whatever they wanted. And at the same time, and now all of a sudden, around Navadvip, you go around the streets and you're hearing these loud, crazy kirtans everywhere. I can imagine it would be very disturbing to them. And it's actually quoted in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that the Chandkazi, some of the Muslims went to him to complain, and they were chanting Hari Hari. And the Chandkazi's like, you're complaining about all these people chanting the name of Hari, and you're coming to me and chanting Hari Hari. Why are you doing this? And they replied, well, they were chanting Hari 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 so much that it's stuck in my head. So that was the situation that they were in. Mahaprabhu was giving them their mercy in a way that they were chanting the name of the Lord just by considering it a joke almost, because they were just hearing it so much that they were making fun of it. Now on the other end, there's the Hindu people who were there, and they were also upset. Who would have thought of this? That Mahaprabhu was here to revive these Vedic principles, and the people who are practicing these principles are getting upset at him for this. And why? It's because they weren't accustomed to this. To them, their religious beliefs were something they did quietly and in prayer, and in their little, it was a very caste-oriented system. So the Brahmanas were very staunchly believed that this was only for them to practice, and it was a very sacred mantra, the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And they were really upset at the loud kirtans that went on, especially the ones that went on during the evening hours, which was often the case at Srivas Anga, which is where Mahaprabhu and his associates were doing kirtan every evening. So they also went to complain to the Qazi. So it's such an interesting dynamic that you have the Muslims, okay, I get it, they're complaining to the Qazi. But now you have the Hindu people who are also complaining to the Qazi. So in his position, it's a no-brainer. So he, at that point, banned the process of Sankirtan in Navadvip. And then one day when he was passing Srivas Angan and he heard Sankirtan, he went inside, took a mridanga and smashed it. We all know this story, right? He smashed the mridanga. And he told everyone there that if they didn't stop this Sankirtan, that he would forcibly convert them to Muslim and at the same time confiscate all their property. Now that's an extremely serious threat when you consider the time and place. At that time, if you were a Muslim, if you were a Hindu and converted to a Muslim, you could never go back to your family, you could never go back to your community, you're ostracized. I mean, consider one of the great acharyas in our line, who's Haridas Thakur. He was persecuted so much because he grew up as a Muslim. And Mahaprabhu made an example to show that it doesn't matter what your background is. All that matters is that you take up the process of chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. But to those people, it was a very scary thought. To all the people in Navadvip, you know, not everyone was as realized as Haridas Thakur. So this for me was, when we talk about this example of free speech, this was just such a powerful point, because here's the Qazi who has now criminalized the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, criminalized the practicing of their religion, of them doing their religious practices, criminalized going out in the street and chanting, criminalized their way of life almost. So there goes their freedom of speech, freedom of religion. You know, if we get into our constitution here, there's a freedom to assemble. There's so many freedoms gone that in this country, growing up or living here now, we take for granted. It's one of the reasons that we can all come here whenever we want, or we can go on the street and chant the Maha Mantra, that we can practice any faith we like, and in this case, the Krishna consciousness movement, so freely and so, you know, so comfortably. And it's one reason that Srila Prabhupada actually really wanted to come to America, because he saw that this was available to him. He saw that this is a country that was, you know, was not very religious at the time, but at least the government was very supportive of whatever you wanted to do. I mean, you really can do anything here right now. I mean, despite our current situation, it's still very fortunate that, you know, in recent events you have travel bans that are considered Muslim bans. But at the same time, the courts in this country are saying, no, you can't have those bans because they're discriminating against a single religion. So it's, like I was saying, we're taking these things, we take them for granted, and at that time they didn't even exist there. But all of a sudden it become blatantly clear to the followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu who were performing Sankirtan that they could not do this anymore. So they went the next day to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and Mahaprabhu was enraged. He was enraged at this. He's like, how can we not perform the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra? This is our birthright. So that day they organized to have a gigantic Sankirtan party in the streets of Navadvip. The Sankirtan party was to be, you know, it's described that when they had it, it was 3 different parties, but in total it had millions of people take part. And all of them had torches. So this was a loud, angry party. And when they started in the evening and lit their torches, it's said that the light from all those torches made it hard to tell the difference between a pitch black night and the bright sunlight. So much light was created by these millions of people. And when they started Sankirtan and started the Kirtan, and this was the first public performance of Sankirtan. Before, it had always been done by small parties or just in the homes, especially in the home of Srivas. But now they're taking it to the streets in this gigantic, protest movement, as I'd like to term it in the context of this class. And they went all over Navadvip before finally heading towards the home of the Qazi. And when the Chand Qazi heard these noises, he sent his guards out to find out what this commotion was. They just heard all these loud instruments and loud voices, and his guards went out and they came running back. They were so scared. They were scared and told him that it was this massive Sankirtan party, and that they were running away. And they told the Qazi, "You should come with us." But by that time it was too late. They had nowhere to run. And it's such an interesting dynamic because at one point there's a Chand Qazi in the home of Srivas Thakur, and he's smashing mridanga and threatening everyone because at that time he was the ruler and he had the power. And he came up against the Lord, and look what happened to him. And it's twofold, because in the whole story of the Chand Qazi, after he smashed that mridanga, he actually had a very special dream, which he relates to Mahaprabhu later. And that he says he was visited by an angry creature, half man, half lion, who threatened that he can never stand in the way of this Sankirtan movement again. So much to the point that he had a scratch on his chest to prove from it. So visibly, you could see him in that position where millions of people are marching on his home. He is scared for his life. He had just stopped their Sankirtan movement. Last night, he had a dream where this angry creature, who is Lord Nrsingadev, who none of us will ever dream of crossing, even on his good side. And on our altar, we have Lakshmi Nrsingadev, Prahlad Nrsingadev, who is a very peaceful and happy incarnation or version of Nrsingadev. But, that's after Prahlad had pacified Nrsingadev. Imagine crossing Ugra Nrsingadev after he came out of that pillar. We have a tree there. Imagine he comes out of the tree somehow. So that's the version that Chand Qazi dealt with, and he had a scratch and his chest was bleeding because of Nrsingadev in this circumstance. So here's this Sankirtan party, and finally they reach the home of the Qazi, and after some time Mahaprabhu goes to speak with the Qazi. And they had such a profound discussion because Mahaprabhu was he was so infuriated that this Sankirtan movement had been stopped, but then he came to the Qazi and they had such a profound philosophical discussion, starting with, why do you kill your mother? And the Qazi is like, what are you talking about? I'm not killing my mother. And Mahaprabhu goes, well, you drink the milk of the cow, you take the other products of the cow, and you're killing her. To the point, I won't elaborate on the whole discussion, but he finally convinced the Qazi that he's right. Jai Shishi Gornitai ki, Sitaram Lakshman Hanuman, Srinath Ji ki. To the point to where the Qazi had accepted the fact that the killing of cows was wrong. The killing of actually any human beings or living entities was wrong. And he proudly proclaimed to everyone there that neither him nor any of his descendants will ever stand in the way of this Sankirtan movement again. So Haribo!
Haribo!
So these are the bold beginnings of our movement that I was reflecting on. They're rooted in these great ideals. We consider them, American ideals living in this country, of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, civil disobedience in such a large protest. But this is what it was. This is what our movement started on, and it was just such to me to think of that. We're living in such a similar time right now where people are similarly so upset. Everyone is so dissatisfied. They're going out on the streets. They're going out on the internet. People are upset with the government. The government is upset with the people. The media is upset with everyone. The government is upset with the media, and then and it's to the point where they're causing this discourse where people are upset with each other. Fighting in such a rough climate. So, thinking about it further, I was thinking, when was another time in recent history when we witnessed a climate like this? Does anyone have any examples or thoughts about this?
In England, they tried to shut our temple down. In England, they tried to shut our temple down, and we had to.
Tulsi says in the UK when they tried to shut the Bhaktivedanta Manor down. Any other examples? Well, the one I was particularly thinking was in the 1960s and 70s when Srila Prabhupada came from India to the US. At that time, the US was in the midst of the Vietnam War. You had people who were upset at the war. Then they were upset at all the big companies. They were upset at the government. They were just upset at how everyone was living life and didn't think it was the way to go. And a lot of people have given up everything just in a form of protest, or as other people term it, to experience the world. So Prabhupada came into that climate and he spoke to all these people directly. He was able to relate to them and present our philosophy so succinctly that he connected with them in not just a surface level, but he connected to their hearts. You had hundreds and thousands of people around the world just going out, chanting the holy name, or building temples, or doing incredible things for Srila Prabhupada. He used these terms of universal brotherhood, or one of his favorites was, "I'm going to turn all these hippies into happies." He started an institution in ISKCON called the Sunday Love Feast, which still continues to this day. But at the time, it really spoke to people, especially the name Love Feast, because that's what they were looking like. So I just really appreciated how bold and how much of a visionary that our founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada was. This past year, this is ISKCON's 51st year, but this past year we celebrated ISKCON's 50th anniversary. And I was fortunate to attend an event in Washington, D.C., which was called the ISKCON 50 Gala. It took place at a very prestigious hotel, the Capitol Hilton, which is just a few blocks from the White House. In that same room, there's been several presidents who have spoken and many really big dignitaries. So we were able to hold this really wonderful gala there. And one of the speakers said something that I thought was very, very interesting and, a deep appreciation for our movement. Her name was Christina Arriaga, and she's the outspoken advocate of religious liberty from the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. Yes, that's a mouthful. And she spoke about, she was appreciating ISKCON, especially for their efforts to promote freedom of religion worldwide. She said that at first people thought that everyone thought that all these devotees were just being brainwashed, and you saw it. There was news reports about this, or people were hired to unbrainwash people or reconvert them, as they say. But then, as time went on, she said she really appreciated how the devotees really stuck to their principles, and people began to appreciate this movement. And now this movement is so known worldwide to promote religious freedom and just being able to practice your religion everywhere. ISKCON itself has practiced in many countries that are like America, where it's completely acceptable to practice any religion, anywhere you like, anywhere you want. It's actually protected by the law, but they've also practiced or tried to or started movements in countries where trying to preach or trying to even go out on the street and talk to people about religion will land you in jail for decades. You know, one of them being the Soviet Union, now known as Russia. You know, recently in Kazakhstan. And, you know, so many countries that aren't this open. And she was appreciating how it didn't matter which circumstance we were in, that we had really promoted that. So, you know, I was really thinking that we are living in such powerful times where people are thinking all these things again. You know, our movement is one of love, tolerance, compassion, and growth. And we can give shelter to so many people with it. In this day and age, you know, Srila Prabhupada was able to connect to so many people. And even if you look in the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he was able to connect with anyone and everyone he came across. It didn't matter if he was you know, first the Chand Kazi, who was a Muslim ruler, or, you know, when he first went to Puri and he met Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya and listened to him for 7 days without saying a word on the teachings of the Bhagavad, and he was giving just impersonal philosophy, but Mahaprabhu didn't say a word. He could relate, and he understood that by listening to Mahaprabhu, by listening to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, he'll gain a level of respect with him. And then when Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya asked, Mahaprabhu told him that, while I respect you very much, I humbly respect you, I disagree with you, and this is why. And at the end, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya realized that this is none other than Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I'll take shelter of him. So Mahaprabhu could connect with anyone and everyone. Srila Prabhupada could connect with anyone and everyone. So I'm very grateful to be part of such a bold and powerful movement. You know, it started with the boldness of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It continued with the boldness of Srila Prabhupada, and it's up to us to continue to be bold with our movement today. Our teachings are so relevant, you know, from in all these years later, they're so relevant. And we just have to find that way to connect with people, you know, depending on the time, place, and circumstance. So I'm very grateful to be part of this revolutionary movement of Mahaprabhu. And thank you very much.